Welcome, welcome, welcome. As we wait for our LinkedIn live stream to start, we would love to know who's joining us today. Please share in the chat your name and where you're joining from. It's great to have all of you here today. As folks join, we would love to know who's with us today. So please in the chat, share your name and where you are joining from. We will get started in just a moment as our LinkedIn live streaming starts. And as you join, if you can share your name in the chat and where you're from. Hi, Jaleel, great to have you from the University of Houston, Mercy University, Rose. Lori, it's great to see you from San Antonio. We got a Houston rep here. I see a couple more University of Houston. Great to see you. Amber, welcome from Texas State. It's great to have all of you here today. Please continue to share where your name and where you're joining from. Catherine, it's great to have you here from Fayetteville. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, so we are neighbors. Great to see you. This weather is feeling great this morning. I hope it's the same in Fayetteville. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled to have our webinar today for our October webinar, and we are going to get started with the Community Learning Exchange. My name is Kim Igwe, and I'm the Professional Learning Manager here at Branch Ed, joining from Charlotte, North Carolina. Before we get started, I want to briefly share a little bit more about Branch Ed, starting with our commitment. Branch Ed's commitment is to achieve sustainable programmatic transformation, leading to improved outcomes for diverse educators who, by extension, benefit all students by preparing them to thrive in our heterogeneous society. We believe that every student deserves access to caring, adaptive, and well-prepared teachers, that every teacher deserves preparation that fuses quality with diversity, and every person benefits when we create a higher standard of education together. We would love to know a little bit more about you, all of those who are joining us today. So if you haven't yet, please put your name and where you're joining from in the chat. And we would love to know your role. And so if you can please respond to the poll that's about to pop up on your screen to know a little bit more about you. I have a couple higher ed administrators, some faculty in the room. It's great to see all of you today. Some familiar faces. Oh, great. We have a community partner here today. Lovely. A PK through 12 administrator. Thank you all for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you all here. So a little bit about this series. This is the second of Branch Ed's 2023-2024 Nuts and Bolts webinar series. The series focuses on the educational ecosystem. At Branch Ed, we believe transforming education happens within an educational ecosystem in which there is a strong connection and collaboration between and among stakeholders to ensure all children have the support they need to thrive. This ecosystem includes, but is not limited to, children, families and caregivers, community organizations, healthcare systems, local education agencies, post-secondary education providers, industry business partners, and government agencies. These stakeholders have unique and complementary roles that converge and diverge to benefit all children by preparing them to thrive in our heterogeneous society. Today's webinar is going to be more of a conversation where we will work to employ a dynamic critical pedagogy to disrupt the status quo and mobilize a sustainable method, pedagogy, inquiry, and change process. At the core, this work is informed by trust, respect, growth, and development. This conversation is an invitation to dream together and explore a collaborative process for building a new social DNA for community building and engagement that puts people before profits. Before we start, I want to share a couple of housekeeping items. So we are recording this and we'll send it in a follow-up email, and it will also be on our resource portal. We're live streaming all of our webinars on LinkedIn, so please join us there as well. Any resources or links we have will be shared in the chat feature in Zoom. You can also use the chat to notify the BranchEd team of if you're experiencing any technical difficulties. And if you have questions throughout, we would love to engage with those questions because this is a conversation. I know it's a webinar, but it's still interactive and a conversation. So please use the Q&A feature or the chat feature, whatever you're more comfortable with, to ask questions throughout and really engage in this conversation. And we'll use those questions to spark conversation with our presenter, who is Dr. Miguel Guajardo, and he's a professor in education and community leadership program and a doctoral faculty member in school improvement at Texas State University. And I see a lot of friends from Texas State University, so I love the representation there. His research interests include community building, youth development, leadership development, race and ethnicity, university and community partnerships, and Latino youth and families. He was a fellow with the Kellogg International Leadership Program and the Salzburg Seminar. He co-founded the Community Learning Exchange, an emerging interdisciplinary community of practice that unites the power of place and the wisdom of people to advocate and work toward community exchange. Dr. Guajardo's work has been informed by local ecology and the values of equity, dignity, and democracy in cross-cultural settings. His teaching, research, and service agenda are informed by a micro-macro integrative theory grounded in practice. We would love to know, before we get our discussion started, what brought you here today? In the chat, please share what you hope to get out of today's seminar. That I'll pass it over to Dr. Guajardo. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Kim. Buenas tardes to everybody. Good afternoon. And to our brothers and sisters from the West Coast, good morning. I think so. Kim, can you see the screen, my slide?
We can't see it just yet.
Okay. So let me, I got to convince myself technology is my friend.
It's a daily thing here. Yeah.
It worked a little while ago, right?
Make sure to use that chat to share what brought you here today and any questions you hope to be answered. We can see your screen now, but we are seeing all of the, we're not seeing the projection of just, there we go. That's perfect.
Okay. Yeah, it's like the new wave of webinars, right? You're sitting in your house and your bed is in the back, or you're, in my case, my grandkids are running around. So folks, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Kim, you'll give me the heads up or the sign if there's questions, and I'm looking for good, provocative, and inviting questions, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a whole anatomy to asking the right questions, right? But just bring what you got, and hopefully this can be more of a plática, if you will, than a talking head. I mean, I got a lot to say, but not all of it is on point at times. But I think it's interesting, and I've been doing this for a while, so I have this, just a little bit on context and thought process. And because I always think that the language we use is really, really important, and because that gives us symbols in our minds and gives us an entry into what's going on. And I remember I've had multiple conversations with folks at BranchEd about the concept of a community learning exchange, and when the nuts and bolts idea was presented, I mean, I love it, but one of the things that I do, and I think it's consistent with BranchEd, is I always do the analysis of the context and the delivery. And to me, when I read nuts and bolts can go everywhere or nowhere, right? And so for me, the nuts and bolts are already made. Somebody developed the design for those nuts and bolts. And so what I'm interested in is looking at the alchemy. You know, I think my role, and I think the role of those of us that live and do work in higher learning, and here again is the play with words that I've really, been disappointed with what higher ed is becoming, because I think it's become a production and credentialist factory. But I'm always, based on the information that I've learned from my community and with my own parents, is that higher learning really does not need a degree. And higher learning begins to respect the wisdom of people and communities and their history. And so this is where I want to spend much time on, and this is why getting to the alchemy, for those of us that are teachers, anybody can come in and get facts. Anybody can come in and read an article, and we'll talk about the article. But really, I think our gift to communities, to students, and to the world is our understanding of how to bring that to life. I think sometimes we call it pedagogy. I think sometimes we call it a good plática. I think sometimes we call it community building. And regardless what we call it, I think there is, this consistent social DNA of bringing the learning to life. And so this is just a little bit, about the background on why, the alchemy of, but because I think the community learning exchange, and I'll talk a little bit about its genesis and history here, but I think it is something that has emerged, even the name emerged in a collective way, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. What I have here is I got a set of slides that really are an opportunity to think and just kind of guide. I've organized this conversation around a book we wrote in 2016, but that's just the guide. I think the work that you're going to see here is really something that has evolved and emerged, and I think, by definition, probably is some of the most radical work I've seen, not just because I'm doing it, but because many of my students and community partners are doing it. And so just a little bit of genealogy of thought and practice, right? This is grounded in, in my family as a learning space. And, I'm an immigrant kid. My family moved to this country the last day of the year of 1968. And, historians say that that's the year that changed the world. It certainly is the year that changed our lives. And much of it, we can talk about the push and the pull factors that impacted that decision for my parents. But part of what I remember and I learned is that, we grew up in a small community in South Texas, no more than 30 miles from the border. So no more than 40 miles from where I used to live. But the people looked like me, but people didn't sound like me. And so part of my own psyche is that I'm still an immigrant, and I'm still that 5-year-old little boy that went to school and didn't know how to communicate. But the people look like me, right? So in this country, I think part of what we've created is this divide where even people that look like us. So I have to believe, because I've lived it, is that these issues are much greater than just the color of our skin, than just the place that we grow up in and our social context. I think, here again, I go back to the alchemy. I think what we do as people really matters. What we do as educators really matters. So part of my growing up is really in a colonia in South Texas. We moved up in life from a housing projects to a property that had no running water nor electricity. But, I never saw myself as poor, because I think my parents, with their infinite wisdom, really saw Yoso's work at play, right? There was a cultural resistance. There was a cultural knowledge base that they understood and they celebrated. And then my world grew. I got 3 brothers, really tight with all of them. And, there's one that he and I he went to school when he was a kindergarten, and I went to school as a first grader. And so I graduated high school in 1982. He graduated high school in 1983. I defended my dissertation in August of 2002, and he defended it in 2003. So, so we grew up together, and we've learned together, but we've also been like this thinking partners. And so family, schools, and community have always been like core to me. And I think they are to many of our families, but I think the conditions that we've created have begun to fracture some of that asset, some of that, cultural wealth. And so for me, it's how do we help re-navigate that? And then, we started some of our work after, undergraduate work at UT Austin. We were teachers in urban centers and rural areas, and we started doing, what we thought was necessary in the community that we grew up with and so we went back home. Some of us literally, some of us figuratively. And so my whole research agenda really originates from South Texas. And it is the place that I've always imagined that if democracy can work in some of the most marginalized of places economically, culturally, linguistically, and so forth from the main media, I think it should be able to work anywhere else, right? And so I'm thinking that democracy was a great idea. We should try it at some point. But I still am convinced that our training ground for a democratic society, democratic thought, is public schools. And so how do we reclaim that in a way that is informed by goodwill and the public good? And so, that work really hit a national scene as we entered academia. And so, I like to think that I get my mail at the university, but really my work is in communities. It's in schools. It's in public spaces. And so we took this and we found an opportunity to expand the thought because of some initiatives that we ran into that fortunately gave us some space to take the thinking that we had done for 10, 15 years in South Texas and apply this at a national level. And so this is what we did was took the Llano Grande work, and I'm not going to say we took it to scale because I don't think any of us can do that and do justice to it. In fact, I think that's a really problematic concept. But we took those ideas and had conversations with people in communities. And so this is where the idea of community learning exchange emerged. Because we thought we were fly, right? We're really sly and said, well, let's start our own community university, right? There's people paying attention, people are reading our stuff. And really the pushback we got from our community partners was, universities haven't been good to us. They don't give us access. They take our land, they take our homes, and and they come in and use us as research. And so I think there's a whole lot of truth to that. And I knew that, but, in my own naivety, I thought we could rehabilitate that. But our partners were insistent that no, there's got to be something else, right? And after multiple pláticas and brainstorming, the idea and the name of community learning exchange, because we don't learn and grow as individuals nor in isolation, and we do much of our support and the sustainability of it is in community. And so that's not just an idea, but it's also a strategy in process and in progress. And so we started this work and worked with 12 communities around the country, some of them inner city, some of them native communities, but we're still going back to what's my role and what is it that I can bring back home, right? So I've been in this conversation, in this plática, and in this multi-sided space, between South Texas and Central Texas, and now the world is, has come to all of us. And so that's just a little bit of context of the genealogy of thought. I think if I was to lay out a logic model, and it is something that that we've certainly used, and when I say we, I'm talking about my community partners, my students, and I, and we don't always necessarily agree, but it makes for some great learning. And I've used the chaos that Ansaldúa, really gifts us with a language and a concept of the Coyochoque imperative, in that really people of color, people that have been in the margins and unresourced people, we've really been, pulled apart. And there's a whole genealogy of thought and challenge, but there's also, Ansaldúa presents a huge possibility, right? And I think this is where I certainly find hope. And I think Ansaldúa was one of those early scholars that really, showed a lot of brave work and brave thought and provocative thought. I think the way it looks like in our institutions and our public schools is that chaos, because we can't necessarily make sense of it, we try to control it. And so what I use here, this industrial type of setup of schools, is that we're going efficiency, right? And we understand that there's a whole pendulum swing, right there. And we can, those of us that study the history of education, we know, and we can name it, and we can identify the players in the room when the whole neoliberal push began. And then when the right players, matched with a certain political ideology, then it went into a government business. And so we deal with the idea of control. And so, but again, in trying to move from the chaos to the control to something else, I think, I certainly turn to Mother Nature. I turn to my own mother. I turn to my parents. I turn to communities that have been under-resourced, but have been brilliant. And so, to find some kind of order where I can nurture and have these conversations, these pláticas, with people that are closest to the issues, I think it's really important. And so I've learned that circle, nothing that I came up with, certainly, because, indigenous peoples have been using this concept to neutralize power and share power, but also to reimagine possibilities. So this is a logic model that I always keep like in the back of my mind, and my students are fairly clear, and I use students very loosely, because I'm the key student most of the time in the space. And so circle, we move it from the classroom into, public spaces. And so this is part of the reframing the engagement, right? So who is hosting? What does the invitation look like? What does the place look like? Because the subline to the community learning exchange is connecting the power of the place and the wisdom of people. And there is tremendous power in places that many times we've, just lost. And, and development and progress has erased some of those histories. But I think the spirits and the knowledge still is present. And so this is part of the reframing, not just in language, but also in practice. And so Kim is going to share a little bit more later on, but so my outline here is really following this book that we wrote in 2016. And this is the place that, we brought some of the thought and the practice together. And this development of the publication of this book was really interesting, because as you do this in feeding the system, right? You develop the proposal, you present it, they either accept it or ask you, after being vetted by multiple people, and they came back and say, yeah, go ahead, move forward. So our work is so dynamic that by the time we got the feedback, got the proposal, we were on to different ideas. And the work had just moved so fast that we wrote where we were at. So it was really interesting, because we submitted the book, the manuscript, And the publishers came back and said, no, that's not what we agreed to. And our pushback was, but that's where the work is at, right? And it was really interesting because, even within our own circle, it was, let's just pull it and take it somewhere else. And so after having multiple pláticas and really intense and good informing pláticas, one of us said, you know what? I know what they want. Let's just reframe it, right? So not only is it the name of the book, but it is also the practice. And so what emerges in this book is really a more articulated and a traditional form of naming and sharing the work. And so as we wrote the different parts of the book, and here again, I think there's always people that are in the work that sometimes bring just a whole different skill set. And so I after writing everything, I said, I got a student, and the student had grown up in the work. She was part of the development of the work, and she was a PhD student. I said, I'm going to give her the book and ask her to come up with, what does the book say based on her understanding? And so she comes up with this really fascinating process. And the book was divided into 4 sections already. But what she does is she gives a different creative, presentation to the different parts of the book. And so I'm using these to outline, right? So the ideas behind the book, she comes up with this imagery because she's an artist and, very talented and a powerful scholar. And so she figures out that, what is emerging in the book is really a combination between the heart and the brain. And, we never wrote that, but it was, that was what it was emerging in her mind. So anybody who's interested in picking up the book, you can even get an electronic version. But I think it's a good primer. I think the second and the third manuals on how to, and without getting into a blueprint, we got a couple of versions of those, but not ready to send out. So this is a little bit of the messiness, right? And I asked a grad student of mine, can you put this into a digital format? Because I'm doing timelines all the time. And she says, yeah, but I love the messiness, right? And so the historiography of the body of work, right? It didn't start when I got a PhD. It didn't start when I was a university professor. This started generations back. And so what I want to lay out here is really this thought. The thought of this is a combination of our ancestors. Power and place is important, and wisdom in people. So this historical timeline of events is really the combination. And I'll introduce the concept that I follow here, because what I've done here is divided really events in my life and even before that into 3 categories that we call the ecologies of knowing, right? Those of you that do work in sociology or psychology will recognize it. It's really a variation of Bronfenbrenner's work. But you need a whole PhD to go and understand Bronfenbrenner. And so what we did was we played with this idea so it was accessible, and not only in place and with people and with events, but also with ideas and theories. And so this has been one of those really useful concepts that's found a lot of utility in a number of my doc students. And so they use it to organize thought. And so this is like a combination between the micro, the meso, and the macro. The micro, which is the second column here, is really what does my life look like? From my memory or my relatives, my ancestors. The meso is what's going on around institutions, organizations, and particularly schools. And what are the events that are happening? And then at the top column is what's going on at the macro level, what's going on around the world. And then what I did was I just started connecting events that happened at the most micro levels and where were they triggered and how were they connected? And then because I again get my mail at the university, right? The bottom row is really about what does the literature say at different periods in time. And so because it's important to do what Valencia, did in documenting the whole evolution of deficit thinking. It's important to know, when did that happen? How was it introduced? And how was it justified? Right? So those challenges need to be documented, but then also, what are the possibilities? Because there's been people doing some phenomenal work forever, but sometimes we don't know about that. And so I use historical timeline here to map out myself, but it shows up in the work, because this is one of those strategies and one of those methods that, when you go into community, you really need to know community. And when you show up with a problem that you want to fix, in my form of engagement, we started off wrong. And so one of the ways that I've found to be really effective is just develop your own timeline, develop your own stories, develop your own history, because there will be events that are never documented, but they are in the psyche and in the hearts of people. But the fact that they don't make it into the news doesn't mean it didn't happen. Right. So this is the combination between the technical and the life world. Right. And so this is, again, I still see myself and I think my emotional disposition is still as that little immigrant kid. So it doesn't matter that I'm at UT Austin and I get a Ph.D. from this institution. The reality is that I'm still wired in a certain way. So these are different strategies, different combinations on how to think through these processes. Okay, I'm trying to hit the next here, but let me go to the. All right, so historiography of ideas, life, and action. I'm going to provoke here and invite. What's your map look like? Okay, nothing that we have to get to right now, but I think we have to get to it at some point. Because if you haven't explored your own place, your own history, then we have so much more to understand. One of my mentors, Enrique Trueba, an anthropologist of education, he spent some time in South America and looking for Freire and studying with Freire, and he used to cite Freire all the time. And he said, Miguel, remember that Freire tells us that men and women who don't understand their place in history will never understand their role in society. And so, Howard Zinn gives us an in. What's the story of the people? We're educators. Let's create our own knowledge. Let's create our own books. Let's create and tell and celebrate our own stories. So I think I want to again invite all of you. What is your life map like? What is your story? And how have you navigated that? So we can go to the chat or come back, right? But I'm going to keep going here unless Kim tells me that there's some really good stories or questions. And so what we did after working for like 5-6 years in different communities across the country, different backgrounds, different histories, different stories, we saw an emergence of certain components. There were certain themes that came up. And categories aren't always my favorite tool for analysis, because I think the stories are much more robust and the stories capture these. But part of what we find is leadership is not an isolated act. Leadership needs to be part of actions. 1. 2, conversations and dialogue are critical, both for relationship building and for pedagogy. Francisco and I wrote a piece in 2013. It's a short document, 5 pages, but it's on the power of pláticas. and other folks, Dolores Delgado Bernal and Fierro have written about pláticas as well in a different context. And but we really lay out this concept as something that we learn from our parents, and we lay it out in three ways. Pláticas has utility in 1, the sharing of story and relationship building; 2, as a form of pedagogy for teaching and learning; and 3, as community building and development. And so, because it presents a really robust pedagogy as it emerges through local and exchanging of ideas. So, because the local knowledge is action. And so we're not talking about a knowledge that sits and is just passive. We're talking about a dynamic knowledge that is moving and changing. And then this knowledge becomes really inquisitive and much more provocative when we start crossing borders within ourselves, within our neighborhoods, within our communities, but then within people and schools. And because this is the way we begin to invite and excite and populate and develop our imagination. And then one of the other thing that we learned was that, that hope and communities do not develop because we've identified pitiful indicators. They do not develop because we've told them how poor they are. They do not develop because we've told them how under-resourced, and they do not develop because they don't have degrees. They develop because they have assets, and they develop because they have hopes and dreams. And so these are axioms that we saw emerge from communities across the country. And we certainly saw them in ourselves and in our own community. So again, a guide, not a blueprint, right? To what is the alchemy that's going on here? And how do we blend and bring these together into a dynamic and critical process? And then we live in a complex world, in a very complicated, where one answer isn't going to take care of everything that we're facing. And so this is part of organizing of thought, organizing of action, and organizing, of strategies. And all of this then helps us make sense of, information, and not compartmentalize it, but keep it in its appropriate place, but know that when we need it, we use it. And so everything starts with the self. The anthropologist George Spindler, Enrique Trueba brought him to Austin one day, and we're having breakfast, tacos and coffee, and we're having this conversation, and Spindler was well into his 80s, and we're talking about education. And he says, here's the issue that I've learned after studying this thing for 50 years, right? He says, when we go to public schools, we learn about everything and everybody except ourselves. And so it was like, boom, right? This major light bulb goes off. And so this began to give me an idea to reorganize Brown-Forburner. That's a whole different generation. But for teachers who are on the run, for school leaders, for community organizers that need to be able to organize thought, action, ideas, and strategies, is like the ecologies of knowing, just kind of bounced from the pages and from the stories. And so, my go-to line is, the first revolution is internal, right? And if we can't do that with ourselves, then what kind of change can we do with others? And so if we start with ourselves, then we can navigate into organizations and larger communities. And part of, the responsibility that I lay out for myself, but also for my students, is we operate in each one of them simultaneously, but the one that is so important for the work we do is really the organization. Because the organization is what Vygotsky called this mediating institution. The role of the organization and the role of schools in this country has historically been to introduce child to world. And if we don't mediate that carefully and effectively, we will catapult child into community. And many times the way it looks like is, the school to prison pipeline, because the organization didn't do their work well. And so this is part of our responsibility as mediators, right? So what does leadership look like in this context? And so it begins to disrupt the traditional order of things, the traditional thought, but also our actions. And so the ecologies of knowing really is something that is always informing the work, the conversations, and this theory of change that we developed. And really, if you look at, when you get the book, if you look throughout chapter 1, 2, 3, it's all aligned. The theory of change is just putting everything together. There's one element that we add, and we call this the RASPA, theory of change. And the acronym is for relationships, assets, stories, place, politic, and action. So we add the politic because the politic is like, akin to culture, right? It's like oxygen. It's everywhere. We breathe it every day. We never interrogate it. But we're always, politically inclined. We're always political animals. And, again, because we don't understand it and we're not taught, doesn't mean it's not happening, right? So this is in a nutshell, kind of an idea, right? And a guidance. And you'll find this in much detail in the book, but hopefully in future pláticas. And then what I want to do is just move, right? So what does Monica tell us the work look like? And so the work, really this work is not essentialized as we do under this neoliberal process, right, of commodifying and measuring outputs. I think for us, the work is really grounded in a thought of sustainability. How do we develop, not to sustain old systems, but so we can develop the sustainability of thought, sustainability of family, sustainability of our actions and communities. And so Monica gives us this imagery that I won't even get into because, it's so deep. But this is, again, is the guidance and the reciprocity between, the researcher, the teacher, the learner, and the student. And I'm telling you, my most privileged of places is being the student. And so, again, this work is really about disruption, but not disruption alone. It's about invitation to reimagine. And so this is the way we run school board meetings. This is the way we run public meetings. This is the way I imagine my parents were organized. Actually, they were in an auditorium when they first went to public schools to see the report on how their kids were doing. And I am here to report that my parents never went back. They never went back to a school meeting, a parent meeting, because they were so insulted. That doesn't mean they didn't commit to public schools. That doesn't mean they didn't commit to their kids, right? They raised 2 Ph.D. at theologian, and the one that has a bachelor's degree has a math degree, is making more money than all of us. And so really committed, but the system was not aligned. And so we want to move that, and we want to exercise and practice an invitation to participate. So the invitation, I go back to that order, right? The invitation is about bringing people to sit together, bringing people to have a plática. And so organize people in communities. And when we invite them, there's a huge need for us, to take on the responsibility of hosting. What does good hospitality look like? Right. So I use Circle, and Circle is one of these go-to pedagogies. And so the way I like to describe it, even for my doctoral students, is that when we use Circle, we are rehabilitating the roll call, because the roll call has really become, a formula, and that logic model is butts and seats will equal money. It does not give anybody an opportunity to show up and be fully present unless we do circle. And my commitment to my students is that when you show up to my classes, your voice will be heard. Opening circle, everybody introduces, talks, and shares what they bring with them. And I've accomplished 100%. Everything else is gravy. And everything else is like really, really key and important. But so circle, and we do circle in schools. We do circle in conference settings. We do circle in public conversations. So, but when you do the invitation, it's really important, right? That the faces that invite are familiar faces. That the faces that invite are present to greet and host. And so we move into spaces, not just for students, because that old axiom of it's all for the kids, I'm going to be really polite. It's nonsense, because we got a whole lot of grown-ups that need to learn, that need to grow, that need to sharpen their skills, and that experience life the way everybody else does. We're in the same tension, and we need to take care of the grown-ups too. And so schools are spaces of innovation in my world, right? So how do we create that? And so schools then become not just where we show up and go and take our kids, but schools become places that we visit. So in this case, I show this because this was at Cuauhtémoc Hall. It not only is a place in public, but it is like the social DNA and power of a community. Cuauhtémoc Hall was established in the 1900s, early 1900s, and it was established by La Sociedad Mutualista de Texas. And so this was a mutualist society that what they did was they hosted dances, and the money they got, the profits, was to help people in need. And so they helped with food, they helped with shelter, they helped with, burials. And so there's a whole moral fabric within our communities that if we visited, we would learn so much more. And so this became a space of pedagogy. And of course, these are grown-ups, right? So I'm using pedagogy a la Freire. And then there are, the spaces that Freire wrote about, right? Sitting under the mango tree. So can we do circle? Can we do pedagogy around the tree in South Texas, El Mezquite? Well, if we do here, and here's the interesting part. This circle originated in a colonia where these ladies lived. And guess where the next place was? At the dean's office. Because we left that colonia, strategized, and practiced, and then showed up to Dr. Manhattan hosting. It would later become the provost of the university, right? So talk about engagement. This is part of engagement. The learning process develops and builds and harnesses an opportunity to exercise, not just our ideas, but also our power and our agency. And then I go back to the timelines, right? This is one of those, and I use timelines in a number of different ways. But one of them is that I think there's power in story. I firmly believe that. I think there is power in the person that becomes a storyteller. But this body of work is about building the agency and moving from the storyteller to the story maker. That's, like my father used to say, "Ita la papa," right? That's where the meat and potatoes is around this work, where we can narrate, collect, and tell our own stories. Might be in writing, might be in timelines, and might be just in plática. But each one of those are legitimate. This timeline was populated like this by community folks. And you'll see the ecologies of knowing. So people are present, Their organization is present and their community at different levels. Again, and a way to organize ideas. And this strategy is also like for specific purposes. So this timeline looks different because we got a certain set of questions that this community wanted to deal with, right? And here again, back to the ecologies. And so here's a re-invitation. Where are you? Where's your story? So I want to keep moving it. And then how do we make sense? And I have a student that wrote a dissertation and he developed this, and the dissertation was about community learning exchange, and he put himself in the middle of it. And this was his rendition of, this is how I made sense of the work. And so I'm going to stop by just asking, what's your story? What is your work? And where's your community? And of course, look forward to future pláticas, but I will open it, Kim, for any questions, curiosities, inquietudes that might be kind of festering out there.
Thank you so much. We can still see your screen, so I'm not sure if you wanted us. Perfect. Now I can see you. A lot of folks in the chat are sharing their stories and sharing just, I think, the meaningfulness they got out of this conversation. One thing you said that will stick with me today and the rest of the week is revolution is internal, and it starts with yourself. So we don't have any questions in the chat yet, but if you do have questions, please share. But I think everyone's chewing on this content in different ways and thinking about their internal work first. Folks, for those who are viewing, if you are interested in learning more, Dr. Guajardo did share a lot about his book, and we will put that link in the chat. If you enjoyed the webinar and want to learn more, please go find the book. I know I will be looking for it to learn more. Just thank you so much, Dr. Guajardo, for sharing your work with us and really pushing us to think beyond in how we can look at our own stories and think about our internal revolution to then move forward. We would love to connect with you. Branch Ed loves to connect. So you can find us on social media at Branch Alliance. We also have our resource portal where you can find different resources in the portal. And that link you can also find in the chat. We would love to connect with you either on social media or through our resources. We also have additional learning events coming up. Our next learning event is October 11th from 12 to 2 and Central Time, 1 to 3 Eastern Time. Our very own, Branch Ed's very own Dr. Ruby Stevens Morgan will be sharing more about the self-efficacy survey Branch Ed developed in collaboration with several EPPs. This survey captures teacher candidates' sense of self-efficacy and the ability to foster an inclusive classroom environment. In the workshop, you'll learn about the tools development, recommendations on how to apply the survey, and how to utilize the findings for program improvement. You can use the link in the chat to sign up for this. And also on the screen, you'll see our series of workshops. One that kept coming back to me is our past workshop that just passed, and it was about community members and faculty coming together. And they had an event in their housing, and all the children and their families were gathered around the table discussing and eating, and it just reminded me, Dr. Guajardo, of all the pieces you were talking about, even how you set up your classroom. So I love the connections we're making through this series in not only our nuts and bolts, but also our workshops. So please come so we can continue making those connections as a community. Our next Nuts and Bolts workshop is November 1st, 12, same time, same place on Zoom, 12 to 1 Central, 1 to 2 Eastern. And if you enjoyed today, you're going to enjoy Professor Emeritus of Special Education, Dr. Beth Harry, who's going to talk about cultural reciprocity. You can register using the QR code on the screen, or the link will be in the chat as well. And lastly, we just want to thank you for your time. If you can please take the brief survey, there's a little poll that's going to pop up on your screen. We're always looking for feedback. And again, Dr. Guajardo, we just really want to thank you for being here with us today, for sharing. I think all of us are going to take a walk after this and really think. It really pushed our thinking. So thank you so much. We really appreciate all of our viewers out there, and we'll see you next time for our next learning event. Please make sure to take that poll, and y'all have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
There are a couple of questions that are coming through. So one of them is about sharing a little bit more about facilitation skills and facilitation experience in the process. So Dr. Guajardo, if we can maybe share those with you, and then maybe that'll include the folks that were inquiring so that we can maybe provide them some additional information. Or would that be in your book?
Well, there are strategies in the book. This book is not a how-to manual just yet, but these are things, and I mean, for me, I would push back and say that that's part of our responsibility, because I mean, the way that I do my teaching is by modeling and by putting people in spaces to practice. And so, one of my biggest concerns in our public educational system is that we've created this narrative of failure is not an option. Yet those of us that are old enough to survive know that some of our best lessons have happened, or most important lessons, not best necessarily, have happened when we make mistakes. But we don't give kids that opportunity. And so kids could make mistakes and could practice the facilitation skills, right? Those ladies that left that colonia under the tree and showed up to your office, that's what that meeting was about. It was about understanding the cultural nuances of what higher ed looks like, understanding how to facilitate, who's going to ask what type of questions, and to what ends, right? And so the development, when we write in the Axiom 1 of leadership development, is part of the work, and it's part of the action. It really embeds. That's the brilliance of that student of mine that put the snake eating itself, is that it's a continuous process. And I think the wisdom is in communities. If we create the spaces for them to practice. There's others, more recent articles also, because that's the world we live in, and I got to feed the meter to be able to do this work. And so there's a couple of other pieces that have come out. One of them, really doing work beyond social justice. What does that look like? Because I think, I think a lot of the social justice work is about boutique social justice. Yes. And the other one is about, decolonizing methodologies. What does that look like in practice, right? A very, very kind of, esoteric kind of concept, but I think there are strategies for us to use on a daily basis that can get us closer. And, and sometimes you don't even know which idea is going to hit, right? I was in a meeting where we were planning a conference, and this will be my last point because it's 12:59. And there's a young lady sitting in the meeting, and she says, I couldn't wait to come to this meeting because I used one of your concepts as the theoretical framework for my dissertation. And here I am thinking, oh, wow, it must have been that article that we wrote in AERJ or qualitative, anthropology of ed. And I said, which one was it? And she said, the 5-page article you wrote on pláticas.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, wow. That wisdom didn't come from us. It came from our parents, right? So you never know what's going to hit.
So true.
But I think being present and being able to ask the question, right, helps us get to a different place.
So true. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome, folks. Enjoy the rest of the day and be good. There's
Thank
a
you
lot of
so
work to
much.
get done, and be safe.
That's right.
Se
You
se
too.
cuidan.
Igualmente. Adiós, everybody.